In my hand is a report, 68 pages from the Office for Budget Responsibility. I tell a lie, it's 68 pieces of random paper that I found scattered around this spare bedroom of mine. I ain't printing that off, 68 pages, I'm not made of money, but just use your imagination. Now, while I'm aware that this report sounds as boring as hell, I can promise you the contents are actually pretty interesting.
No, it's not.
Just give me a chance. You see, the OBR, their job is to forecast the health of the UK economy. They release these reports alongside key political events like the Autumn Statement. Now, financial forecasts are wrong more than they're right, and you'll hear me say that a few times throughout this video, but this is the best data we've got and talks about everything from house prices to what your quality of life is going to be like going forwards. All of the headlines you've seen in the papers are quoting this report, and today we're going to give it a little bit more substance. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this today, but I will look for some positivity where I can, but let's not beat around the bush. This is a forecast of us entering into a recession, so at times it's going to be a little bit bleak. There's timestamps for you below if you want to skip to any sections that are relevant to you, and the report is also linked below, of course, but let's get on with it.
In the face of unprecedented global headwinds, families, pensioners, businesses, teachers, nurses, and many others are worried about the future.
I think by now we're all sick of the word
Inflation.
So my first question is, when will it all end? This chart on screen provides the OBR's thoughts. So these coloured bars are the things that contribute to the total overall inflation figure. Each of these coloured bars represents a different factor contributing to inflation and the pain we've all been feeling. So the red bars are energy prices, and you can see these make up a large part of the overall inflation data. This dotted line here at the top is where inflation would be if the government wasn't helping everyone with their energy bills. They think inflation would be 14% right now without that help. The graph suggests we're at peak inflation now, and it's going to fall away over the course of 2023. But make no mistake, peak inflation and it falling away still means we're going to see large price rises over the course of 2023. Now, one thing that caught my eye when I was looking at this was food prices. You can see them here. This purple bar makes up a large part of the inflation figure deep into 2023. Now, the astute of you will have also noticed from 2024, it all reverses. The forecast is predicting a period of deflation. If inflation is the price of goods and services going up, then deflation is the opposite of that. And while that might sound good on paper, everything getting cheaper, that's the hallmark of an economy that's going backwards. So it's no coincidence that this period of deflation coincides with a recession that's being forecasted. This chart is forecasting 8 quarters of deflation. That's 2 years. I remember coming into 2020, into the decade, and all the headlines being like, oh, it's going to be a return to the roaring 20s, the next big boom. A reminder that economic forecasts mean diddly squat. You would expect in a period of deflation that interest rates are going to be brought back down to help stimulate the economy. As businesses struggle with people not spending money, this is the deflation. They're dropping their prices essentially because there's less demand. Now, struggling businesses means only one thing: unemployment. The unemployment rate currently in the UK is the lowest since 1974. Now that means businesses are competing aggressively for staff, which actually is making inflation worse because they need to pay people more to attract them. More wages, more spending.
More problems.
But as the recession bites and people start cutting back, that means businesses will cut back as well. They'll likely start firing staff, and you're going to see businesses go bankrupt, which means loads of people lose their job in a business at once. The report forecasts unemployment rates to rise to 5% from 3.5% where we're sat at the moment. Now, historically speaking, that isn't that high. The unemployment rate in 2008 hit 8.4%. That's nearly 1 in 10 people. But you can't really say to someone who's just lost their job or their business has gone bankrupt, well, don't worry, mate, unemployment levels are still low, it's okay, chin up. I think sometimes we can quote these statistics and facts and forget that there's real people behind them. So that rise in unemployment would mean 500,000 people would lose their job, according to this forecast. You'll remember that we did the monetary policy report the other day, and they were forecasting more like 1 million people would lose their job. Again, financial forecasts, all opinion, doesn't really mean much. So the rise in unemployment, as I said, would be 500,000 people, and they think it would peak in 2024. Now, I've said it a few times before, and I'm going to say it again. Losing your job is the biggest risk that you face as a result of a recession, loss of income essentially, and then not being able to survive that period. Just make sure that you have a robust emergency fund, especially if you've just recently moved jobs, as is the way with businesses. They'll get rid of the newest staff first because they're the cheapest to get rid of. Now, for those of us who don't lose their jobs, let's look at earnings. The sections we're about to discuss now I think are the most important and look at quality of life essentially. Nominal earnings are expected to grow by 5.9% in 2022 and 4.2% in 2023. That's 0.6 and 1.3 percentage points higher than our March forecasts. Well, did I tell you about forecasts? Now, those rises are quite high, and you could be excused for sitting there going,
"Tell them to bring me my money."
but we need to take our wage growth and then minus the rate of inflation to get real wage growth. One step forward, two step back, guys. Despite strong earnings growth over the next couple of years, high inflation means real wages will fall sharply by 1.8% in 2022 and 2.2% in 2023. The last time we saw 2 years of declines in real wages was in the financial crisis, so it should come as no surprise that with falling real wages, we also get lower household disposable income. I don't need to tell you that everyone feels poorer at the minute, but RHDI, or real household disposable income, is our best measure of living standards. This forecast predicts that we're going to see 2 successive falls in this RHDI figure. So 2022-23 will fall by 4.3% and 23-24 falls another 2.8%. That's the 2 biggest drops in real household disposable income since records began. To help you visualise this figure, take a look at this graph. You can see the forecast area here, and these red parts are the declines. And these parts are far more severe than any drop we've ever seen before. Me trying to put a positive spin on this, I would say, we can always see that periods of decline have been followed by periods of growth, but this is arguably the bleakest data in this report. The issue we have is that since the pandemic, we've seen a decline in living standards already, and now we're seeing them slip further. This takes us back to 2013 in terms of RHDI, and by 2027 we're still only expected to be at 2019 levels. A lost decade when it comes to living standards. Understandably, a fall in real household disposable income also means we're going to see declines in saving rates. Now this one hits me the hardest because I know that saving consistently is the best way for an individual or a family to improve their economic position over time. But people can't magic money out of nowhere, and if something's got to give, it's going to be the savings rate. This graph tells us all we need to know. Look how savings rates exploded during the pandemic, as many people just had nothing to spend their money on. But look how the savings rate is forecasted to collapse to essentially nothing, and how that differs from even the March forecast in yellow. Again, the motto of this video is these forecasts are prone to change. I mean, they've changed their mind on every forecast since March, basically, by quite a lot in some cases. But if you want a positive take on this rather grim graph, if you feel crap about your savings rate, just consider the fact that if you're saving anything more than 0% of your income, you're above average. Just remember that in these tough times, if you're moving forwards and not going backwards, you're doing exceptionally well. With this lack of an ability to save, fall in real household disposable incomes, the recession and rising interest rates, it should come as no surprise that house prices are forecasted to fall. Mortgage and properties. I'm going to make a whole separate video on this, so I'm just going to touch on it briefly now and I'll keep it simple. House prices are forecasted to fall by 9% between the 4th quarter of 2022 and the 3rd quarter of 2024. Obviously, that's not ideal for homeowners, but for first-time buyers and people who want to invest in property who are sat there getting all excited, it might not actually be good news either because your real wages are falling as well, so you might not see the benefit of the whole 9% essentially because your income's going backwards as well. The report predicts that the price to earnings ratio between your income and how inexpensive a home is, so how many multiples of your yearly income do you need to buy the whole house for cash, will stay at 7 times, which is still really high when you consider most lenders will only lend you 4 times your income. They think that prices will start to rise again from 2025. Now, while we're on the subject of property, in the budget, Jeremy Hunt gave local councils the power to increase council tax by 5% a year. This report on page 38, bullet point 5, basically says that they think that councils will raise council tax by 5% a year for the next 5 years. The OBR, before they compile a report, communicate with the government about their plans so that they can forecast what they think the impacts will be. So if they're saying we think they're going to increase council tax by 5% a year for 5 years, you can bet your bottom dollar that that's going to happen. It's unwelcome news if true, but it's a stark reminder how the government is desperate for extra income at the minute, not helped at all by national debt. In the last 20 years, the UK debt level has become ludicrous. In 2000, the debt level was around 20% of GDP, so the total UK debt was 20% of the value of all the stuff the country made in a year. It'd be like if you earned 100 grand a year and you had 20 grand worth of credit card debt. But yeah, 20 years later, and now the debt to GDP ratio is 102%. The person with 100k earnings has got 102 grand on a credit card now. With more debt comes more interest. And for every 1% raise in the interest rate on this monumental debt pile that the UK has found itself with, we pay an extra 26 billion a year in interest. In August 2022, we paid 8.2 billion in interest on our debt. That's 1.5 billion more than we paid in August 2021. That's enough to pay 30,000 doctors their average salary of 50k a year, just in extra interest in a year, just in 1 month. The UK has a debt problem and it isn't going anywhere. We haven't been this up to our eyeballs since the 60s. Now the aim, or what they'll say the aim is to grow GDP so that this debt becomes a lesser ratio of total GDP. It'd be like your person with 100k earnings and 102k on a credit card going, well, I'm not going to pay the debt down, I'm just going to go earn more money. The problem is this document concedes that we're entering a recession and growth isn't exactly in an abundance during a recession. But it's not going to stop us from borrowing. This table depicts how this report thinks borrowing will pan out in the coming years. You can see here they forecast it to rise into 2024 and then it'll fall away. Notice how much of a difference in the forecasts there have been just since March. Good old forecasts. Now just my 2p here, it seems that since 2008 the UK has lurched from one crisis to the next. So I don't know how with any certainty you can sit here and predict up to 2027 that things are just going to come down and everything's going to be nice and smooth. But I guess they've got to report some figures, haven't they? But to be fair to them, they do concede my point in a way. So while we cannot be certain where the next shock might come from or how costly it might be, it's clear that the UK's high debt stock and interest burden leave the public finances more exposed than they have been in decades. I mean, you may be able to tell from the video that I don't think that this forecast is going to pan out the way that they say it is. This report is forecasting a one-year recession starting in Q3 2022 with a peak to trough fall of 2.1% in GDP. Which differs from the Bank of England's forecast the other day of a 2-year recession. It's all just opinion at the end of the day, some more informed than others, but no one knows what's going to happen between now and 2027. All I know is I can't control these macro events. All I can control is my little financial bubble that I live in. And I need to make sure that I'm prepared for whatever the weather. There have been 11 recessions since 1948, one every 6 or 7 years on average. Even if the circumstances that create them are unusual, periods of economic decline are normal. Anyone over the age of 14 has lived through something like this before. Now, I'm going to get a load of flack in the comments for saying this. Someone's going to say, oh, you sat there with your rose-tinted glasses on, the world's going to end. But I just have to sit here and think, why worry about stuff that I can't control? I just need to survive this period of time. I need to believe that my own destiny is in my hands, that I am the biggest influence over my overall success. Not Rishi Sunak, not the threat of recession, not the contents of this 68-page report. Well, this is just 68 random pieces of paper, but use your imagination.
They got problems on problems on problems on problems on problems on problems. I solve them. I run through the money, the pressure be calling. Left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back.